Wow. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see so many people this morning. And we're just going to give everyone a few moments to come in. Thank you. And
I'm putting the video on.
Okay. Well, it has the TV turned down.
Very dark.
Okay. All right.
Mute yourself.
All right. Good morning again, everyone. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Dennis Lloyd, and along with other members of my family and the affiliated members with the Slave Legacy Coalition, we have formed the coalition in an effort to preserve and provide a platform for those institutions and organizations and individuals who have a story about slave legacy. And we meet monthly on the second Wednesday of each month at 10:30. And during that time period, we try to present individuals who have a story or a connection to the legacy of slavery. So we have here, and we also welcome individuals who are joining us or with us if they have an interesting story that they feel at some point, or their organization that has a history of a connection to slavery and pre and post emancipation. Please let us know, because we certainly would like to hear, your stories, and I know our membership would also. Today we have a very exciting presentation by Kyera Singleton, who is the executive director of the Longfellow House. But before I introduce Kyera, I'm just going to turn it over to Egypt for a minute, my daughter, who will give us an update on our announcements. Egypt.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. And good morning, Dad. How are you doing today?
Okay, very good. Thank you.
First, before I start the announcements, I would like everybody to help me wish my in the chat a happy birthday. Today is his birthday. So, Dad, happy birthday to you. Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you.
And if everybody could mute their computers, that would be great. I first want to let everybody know that on June the 18th,
Egypt, you've muted yourself.
You muted yourself, honey.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
I do apologize. I'll start back over. I wanted to let everybody know on June the 18th.
What's happening? You did it again.
I don't know what, I'm having difficulties. I do apologize, everybody. Let me try that again. On June the 18th at First Church in Cambridge, there will be a Juneteenth commemorative, which will be a fabric art project that First Church has put together. It's called Wade in the Water, and it will be remembering and honoring the enslaved persons at First Church. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware, Darby Vassell, who is my ancestral grandfather, his mother, Cuba, was buried, not buried, but was baptized at First Church in Cambridge. And I will be speaking along with Paula Parrish, and Marieke Van Dam will be there as well as my father and my stepmother, Beverly Lord Parks Lord, and my two children. And that will be at First Church in Cambridge, and that would be June 18th, and that will be at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. I also want to let everybody know about on June 18th as well, at the Longfellow House, there will be a Juneteenth gathering from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. And at 6:30 p.m., there will be a film screening, and my dad, Dennis Lloyd, will be introducing Dr. Harris Gibson, and the film screening will be the film Descendants. And that will be June 18th at the Longfellow House, and the film screening starts at 6:30. I would like to also remind everybody that July and August is we take our time off during those 2 months. So we will not have a Slave Legacy History Coalition meeting in July and in August. However, we will start back up in the fall, and we will start on September the 13th, where our speaker will be Vice Provost of Special Project at Harvard University, Sarah Blyke. And that will be September 13th, and Sarah Blyke will be our presenter. I will also, my final announcement, I would like to let everybody know that we are so happy to announce that we have a new employee that will be working with the Slave Legacy History Coalition and the Longfellow House. Her name is Naomi Gordon, so you guys will be hearing from her. She's a recently graduate from Wellesley College, and I just wanted to take a moment and let her introduce herself to everyone. And Naomi, are you here with us today?
Right there. You want to say?
I am. Good morning. Thank you for introducing me, Egypt.
Oh, you're welcome.
So as Egypt said, I'm the Descendants Partnerships intern. So working with the relationship between SLHC and Longfellow House. Currently, I've been doing a lot of support for the Juneteenth event this weekend. So I hope to see some of you guys in person. That would be great. So yeah, hello, and hopefully we will all be working together.
Great, that's wonderful. Again, Naomi, we are very happy that you are here, and wouldn't happen without the Longfellow House. So Chris, Begin, and Emily, thank you so much for all your support. We do appreciate you. And that is all the announcements that I have for today, and back to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And again, Naomi, thank you. We're very happy that you're here with us, and we look forward to all working together. And again, this morning, we are very honored to have Kyera Singleton. Kyera is currently a fellow at Harvard University, and however, she's working on her PhD with the University of Michigan. And over the years, Kyera, I am very impressed, I must say, with the number of awards and fellowships that you have participated in, been awarded in your career. And it clearly is demonstrated in the way that you manage and the presentation that I'm sure we all will find interesting about the Royall House. So I hope you have had the opportunity to read Kyera's history and what she's been involved with, which is very extensive. And so we're looking forward to hearing from Kyera this morning, and I am going to turn it over to her so she can begin. And welcome, Kyera. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you for having me today. It's been a pleasure to get to know you in Egypt and build a relationship. So today we are actually going to do a virtual tour of the Royall House and Slave Quarters. Dennis asked me to present about the museum, and I figured what better way to present about the museum than to actually show it for people who haven't been, in a while. So we'll kick off with a virtual tour of the museum, and then I'll come back and field any questions that anyone has. Before I get started, one of the things that's really important to me in terms of how we talk about the Royall House, how we think about its history, is to understand that the plantation is a site of memory. It is a site of memory for the 60 Black women, men, and children who we know were enslaved there over the course of 40 years. And over the next year, we'll be unveiling a bunch of new research that really does look more into the lives of several of the enslaved people who we know were enslaved on the plantation. And I'm really excited about that. And hopefully, Dennis will have me back when it's time to release our report. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to show you the virtual tour that we created for the museum.
Welcome. My name is Kyera Singleton, and I am the Executive Director of the Royall House and Slave Quarters, a museum that is located in Medford, Massachusetts. Our museum has existed since 1899, and in 1960 we were designated a National Historic Landmark. Our museum tells the complicated history of Northern slavery and contestations of freedom in the 18th century, through telling the story of the wealthy royal family and the Black people they enslaved to create their wealth. Before I tell you more about our site, I just want to provide some historical context about slavery in the North. When we often think about slavery in the United States, we think about the South. However, that is a mistake. Slavery was a vital part of the North's economy. Slavery in Massachusetts really began in the 1600s when European settlers enslaved indigenous populations. Not only did they enslave indigenous peoples, but they stole their land. And on this land, they cultivated food, livestock, and wood that was then used to fuel sugarcane plantations in the West Indies. In 1641, Massachusetts became the first American colony to formally legalize slavery. By 1650, scholars such as Wendy Warren assert that over half of the ships that were going in and out of the Boston Harbor were going to and from the sugarcane plantations throughout the West Indies. So it's really important that when we think about the history of slavery in Massachusetts, that we think about how both indigenous people and Africans were enslaved in order to fuel the North's economy. That brings us back to our site. In 1737, Isaac Royall Sr., who had made a fortune as a merchant mariner, as well as a sugarcane plantation owner in Antigua, moved his family from Antigua back to his native New England to live on Ten Hills Farm. Ten Hills Farm was a 500-acre estate that Isaac Royall Sr. purchased in 1732. Ten Hills Farm was once occupied by Governor Winthrop, and the land was part of his 1631 land grant. When the royal family moves here in 1737, they bring over 27 enslaved women, children, and men. Where I'm standing is in front of the summer kitchen or the out kitchen. This kitchen, which is located outside of the main estate, which you'll see a little bit later, was used by the enslaved people, most likely enslaved women, to prepare food for the royal family during the hotter summer months. And if you follow me, we'll go to one of my favorite panels in the museum. From about 1737 until the start of the American Revolution, the royal family enslaved over the course of these decades some 60 women, children, and men who maintained the 500 acres. While we don't have full names of the enslaved people who lived here, we do know some of their first names and we've listed them all. And this is really, really vital for us because it really drives home the point that this place is a site of memory. Now that I've given you some background information about the history of Northern slavery, as well as the royal family, our wonderful tour guide, Lee LaFleur, is going to take you throughout the grounds and into the main house so that he can show you how we talk about the interconnected and complex lives of the royal family and the enslaved people who made their lavish lifestyle possible. I really hope you enjoy your tour.
Hello, my name is Lee LaFleur, and I'm happy to welcome you to the Royall House and Slave Quarters. On today's tour, we will be talking about the lives of the royal family and the lives of the people that they enslaved who lived here at this very location. When we talk about the Isaac Royall House, we're actually talking about two separate Isaac Royals, Isaac Royall Sr. and Isaac Royall Jr., his son, who is in fact probably the most famous of the two. Isaac Royall Sr. was a plantation owner on the island of Antigua, where he grew sugarcane and enslaved many black women, men, and children. Their family was part of the triangle trade, which involved turning sugarcane into rum, which was then taken to Africa and sold in order to enslave more individuals. In 1737, he moved his entire family from the island of Antigua here to Medford, Massachusetts, along with 27 enslaved individuals. The place we're standing in used to be known as 10 Hills Farm, and it's much larger than the space that we're seeing at the moment. 10 Hills Farm was roughly a 500-acre farm, formerly owned by the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop. In 1732, Isaac Royall Sr. purchased the main building on this property. Over the course of the next 5 years, working with his brother, they enlarged the existing house into a 3-story mansion, added a stable, a carriage house, as well as formal gardens. In addition to expanding the mansion, they also had a summer kitchen built. Summer kitchens are popular in the Caribbean where it's too hot to cook inside the house. These kitchens allow you to do cooking outside of the main structure. The clapboard structure behind me is the slave quarters, and this was thought to have been built a number of years after the royals arrived here. The summer kitchen, which is here on my left, and the winter kitchen, inside the house here on my right, are only about 35 feet apart from one another. So you can imagine that people might have been moving between both locations at any time in preparing food. And those people would have been the enslaved people who lived here at this location. Here we are inside of the winter kitchen. We start the tour inside of the winter kitchen to help sort of center the lives of the enslaved people who lived and worked in this space. In 1739, just 2 years after the royals moved here, Isaac Royall Sr. passes away. At that time, a room-by-room inventory was done of the entire property. This is how we know what structures were on the property and which items were in the house. It's also how we know a lot about the enslaved people who were living here at that time. According to the inventory, we've been able to identify a number of the things that are in this very room. For instance, we know that the royals owned a spit jack, which is a kitchen efficiency tool of sorts used for rotating meats primarily in front of a fire. In addition to that, we know that the royals had a number of expensive items, such as pewter dishes, which would have been imported from Europe. This space is a workspace primarily for enslaved people who lived and worked at Royall House. The work that they would have been doing not only would have involved maintaining the farm, the livestock, and the orchards that are here on the property, but also in preparing food for the royals and their guests. Food preparation at Royall House would have been an enterprise that happened all year round. Remember, here in New England, where the winters are very cold, very little that's being grown at that point in time in the year. So the enslaved people would have been responsible for preparing food and storing food and preserving it for the royals to eat all year round. Enslaved women would have been primarily responsible for cooking, curing meat, milking cows, churning butter, skimming cream, and picking berries to make preserves, juices, jams, jellies, and pies. This is the cooking hearth inside of the winter kitchen, and here you can see some of the utensils that the enslaved women in particular would have used when preparing meals here. So you can see a number of different pots, a number of spatulas, and some of the ladles here. This is an oven that could have been used for baking bread or other items for the royals to eat. The 1739 probate inventory lists right here in the winter kitchen that there were actually 5 Negro beds or bedding in this very room. So we can get a sense of what those items might have been like. This means that not only was the kitchen a workspace, but there were actually enslaved people who slept in this very spot, which may have been useful to the royals if the enslaved people needed to be doing cooking throughout the day and throughout the night, or if they were needed for other tasks within the home. Here we are in the dining room at the Royal House. So this is the place where the royals would have had their meals. This room also showcases the wealth of the royals. The 1739 inventory lists a number of expensive items in this room, including these Cheney plates, champagne glasses, and the sconce, which is the most expensive item in this room. We also know, with its proximity to the kitchen, that there would have been enslaved people, primarily women, who would have been serving the meals for the royals as they dined here. Additionally, when you look at the woodwork around this room, we know that there would have been enslaved people who were responsible for taking care of this wood and maintaining this room. Here we are in the east parlor and the west parlor of the house. In this space, you can really see some of the decorative flourishes that the royals put into the design of this space. In addition to the window seats, which we've seen in other spaces of the house, you also have the Delft tiles, which are in almost every room. The parlors actually serve a dual purpose. You can have the doors closed to create a more cozy space. Particularly in the wintertime, you can imagine having the fireplace going and sitting in a comfy chair by the fire. But with the doors open, they could use the entire space for entertaining, which we know the royals did a lot of during their time here. With the doors open here in the west parlor, you can actually see how much more grand this space is than that one over there. The west parlor is one of the rooms added by the royals, and its extravagance is marked by its high ceilings. One of the things we like to highlight in this space is the archways and the pillars, which are even more decorative than they are in the east parlor. As one of the more prominent families in the Boston area in the mid-1700s, the royals did a lot of entertaining. We know that the enslaved people who lived and worked in this house would have been responsible for cooking the food and serving the guests who would have come for parties at the royals' house. In addition to that, once the parties were over, we know that the enslaved people were responsible for staying up long hours cleaning up after guests. Here we have a portrait of Isaac Royall Jr. at age 22. This is shortly after the death of his father, as he became not only the man of the house, but essentially the owner of this house in general and also the plantations in Antigua. Isaac Royall also had a younger sister whose name was Penelope. And upon the death of their father, not only did Isaac Royall inherit some of the enslaved people, but Penelope also inherited some of the enslaved people who lived here as well. Isaac Royall Jr. is probably the better known of the two Isaac Royals. He was a businessman, he owned a tavern, he owned many acres of farmland, not only here in Massachusetts, but in also other parts of New England. In addition to maintaining ownership into the plantations that were in Antigua, he also was a person who was part of the Governor's Council here in Massachusetts. This is a painting by John Singleton Copley of Mary and Elizabeth Royall, who were the daughters of Isaac Royall Jr. The original for this painting is hanging in the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston. I like to point to this picture because Mary and Elizabeth Royall lived here in the house with the royal family. But there were also a number of enslaved families and children who lived here at the same time. While we don't know necessarily how close these families interacted, we do know that enslaved people lived in this very house, and that the slave quarters itself is only 35 feet away. So we know that these people were certainly in each other's lives and must have been having some sort of relationship with one another. When Isaac's sister Penelope gets married, we know that she moves into Cambridge with her husband and 7 of the enslaved people she inherited from her father. This gives us an opportunity to think about how enslaved families who lived here at the Royal House were being separated when the royals moved to new locations. We don't really know how often then those families and those family members were able to be in touch with one another. We do know that Isaac and his sister were relatively close, so perhaps one of the enslaved people would get to travel with them or pass a message with them when they went to visit one another. But this is just an example of how enslaved families were affected by slavery, even right here in the North. We have the names of approximately 60 enslaved people who lived here at the Royal House. Yet we know that when the royals first arrived here, they came with only 27 people. That means during the time that the royals were here, they were selling people, buying people, trading people, and we know from an ad that was placed in a newspaper that Isaac Royall sold a man named George to someone else who lived in the city of Lynn, because that person ran away. Running away is one of the acts of resistance that enslaved people used to free themselves from bondage. However, it's worth pointing out that in a place like Medford, Massachusetts in the 1700s, there were not very many enslaved people around, and so running away was actually a really tricky enterprise to undertake. Enslaved people used a variety of other means, however, to show their resistance to the institution. In some cases, slowing down work that they were charged with doing. In other cases, breaking dishes. In some cases, feigning ignorance about what someone was asking them to do. This stairwell leads from the winter kitchen to the kitchen chamber, which is right here on the 2nd floor. These stairs also go from the basement to the attic, all workspaces that would have been used by the enslaved people. These spaces included a root cellar and a spinning garret for textile work. On the 3rd floor, above the kitchen chamber, the inventory lists bedding and a Negro cradle, so we know that enslaved people would have also occupied that space. This stairwell then would have been used by the enslaved people who were working in the kitchen on their way to this storage room right above it. You can imagine then that they would be carrying items either from another place in the house or from the kitchen to be stored upstairs in this room. You can see how worn and warped these stairs are in particular places. You can also notice how they're shaped as sort of narrow triangles, which would make it really difficult to be lifting items to carry up these stairs. This particular stairwell is also sort of out of sight for the rest of the house. So the enslaved people would have used this, but probably not the royals and probably not their guests. You can also see through this window the slave quarters itself. So not only are we very close to the slave quarters, but guests would not have been able to see this structure unless they were using this stairwell, and neither would the royals. Welcome to the 2nd floor of the house. This room is known as the kitchen chamber, in part because it's above the kitchen. In terms of the use of this room, we know that it was a storage room and also a work room, primarily for the enslaved people who lived and worked in the house. In addition to the closets and storage spaces that are native to this room, the inventory also lists a number of trunks that are located in this space. A number of different types of linens were listed as being in this room, including 24 tablecloths, 15 napkins, and 12 towels. Compared with the design and architecture of the other rooms in the house, one of the things you'll notice about this space is that it is very plain in its design. The walls are bare. You'll notice there are no window seats in this room, and the windows themselves are also quite plain. Looking here at the fireplace, as compared to the other fireplaces throughout the house, you'll notice that there are no tiles lining these fireplaces. And there's just basically the plain brick background here. This just gives you a sense of how this room was valued compared to other rooms in the house that we'll be visiting. We know that this space was used for a number of different purposes. One of those purposes was, we believe, as a dressing room. This item here on the table is a goffering iron that would have been used for ironing the ruffles on a frilly shirt. Other items in this room are more for mending clothes or creating clothes, which is something that we believe the enslaved people who lived here would have also done. There is a sewing kit that is currently in this room on the table, and in addition to that, a number of pieces of fabric were found in this room, including slave cloth, which we know would have been used to make clothing that the enslaved people would have worn. The 1739 inventory for this room lists 2 sets of Negro bedding in this space. You can see the beds that are here are very simple beds, very low to the ground and very plain. We know that this, as I have already said, was a workspace. So not only was it a workspace, but it also doubled then as a sleeping quarters for the enslaved people who would have constantly been working around the clock, keeping fireplaces going, sewing, mending clothes, a wide variety of tasks that would have taken up most of their time. We'll also notice as we continue on the tour that this room, this space, is in very close proximity to the other rooms in the house, which would have meant the enslaved people were living in very close quarters with the Royals themselves. The inventory for this room also lists a looking glass as being one of the items that was here. So we know that this room also, in addition to being a workroom and a sleeping quarters for the enslaved people, we know that the space was also a dressing room for the Royals. So you can imagine Isaac Royall coming in here from his bedroom just across the hallway, standing here in front of this looking glass and being assisted or attended to by one of the enslaved people, perhaps helping him to put on his vest, helping him with his powdered wig, helping him to put on his ruffly shirts. So now we come to the marble chamber, which would have been the master bedroom for the house. So this is the room that Isaac Royall and his family would have slept in. We also believe that if there were esteemed guests who maybe came to visit the royal family, that Isaac Royall may have let them use this room. This room is directly across the hallway from the kitchen chamber, which is where we know that there were enslaved people sleeping and working. As the master bedroom, the marble chamber is really the most ornate room in the house. You'll notice the marbling on the archways and pillars here, which is how the room presumably gets its name. In addition to that, you'll also notice the window seats, which would allow someone to sit here in the window and read with the sun coming in through the windows. This canopy bed is probably the most expensive item in this bedroom. You will also notice this silk dressing gown, which is the kind of thing Isaac Royall would have worn around the house throughout the day and into the evening, along with a matching cap to replace his wig. You can imagine the enslaved people who would have helped him to get dressed for bed and who would have come over just from across the hallway in the kitchen chamber where they're sleeping and working to help keep the fireplaces going, and before he got into bed, use this bed warmer to help warm up the comforter at night. Massachusetts winters are particularly cold. So throughout the night, enslaved people who lived and worked here would have needed to make sure that the fires were going and that the rooms were warm, and would have needed to have been very quiet as they were doing that work, moving throughout the house. I wanted to point out as well the detailed Delft tiles that you'll find in the fireplaces throughout the house. You'll notice that these tiles themselves each have different images that are printed on them, which makes them really interesting to look at as we tour around the house. But again, I want to remind you that across the hallway in the kitchen chamber, there are no tiles in that room. Isaac Royall Jr. received a mahogany desk very much like this one on his 17th birthday. But this chemistry textbook was actually owned by Isaac Royall. Here inside this book, you can actually see a copy of the Royall family crest, which includes 3 sheaths of wheat. This crest was also the official crest of the Harvard Law School. In 2016, due to protests over the connections between the Royall family, the university, and slavery, the crest was removed from Harvard Law School. Welcome to the Freedom and Emancipation Room, which is our final stop on the tour of the mansion. The ideas and items in this room represent a variety of perspectives on freedom around the time of the American Revolution and the period just thereafter. Isaac Royall Jr. was a Loyalist who abandoned this house on the eve of the American Revolution and left behind the enslaved people who lived here. On my right here, we have a tavern sign from Jonathan Porter's Tavern in Medford Square. The bullet hole in it is said to be from Medford Minutemen returning from Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775, upon realizing that its illustration is the British Royal Coat of Arms. On my left here, we have a portrait of George Washington. This house was used as a base of operations by the colonial army during the American Revolution. Generals Stark, Lee, and Sullivan were all said to have been here, as well as George Washington. And it's also said that there were prisoners of war who were interrogated in the marble chamber we visited previously. Here on this side of the room, we have a variety of different panels on the wall that highlight some different perspectives on freedom at the time of the American Revolution. From quotes from Abigail Adams to Chief Justice William Cushing, we hear the voices of people who are thinking about what freedom means to Americans, but also to the enslaved Africans who were here in the country at the time. We have a quote from Mum Bet, who petitioned for her own freedom. And it's important to think about how enslaved Africans used this moment and the language of the revolution to talk about their own freedom and how it was not necessarily being included in the struggle for American freedom. This panel features the words of Isaac Royall Jr. from his will, in which he offers Belinda Sutton, one of the women who was enslaved here at the Isaac Royall House and Slave Quarters, her freedom or the option to remain enslaved. Belinda chooses her freedom. In order to support herself and her daughter, she petitions the Massachusetts legislature for a pension from the Royal estate. Surprisingly, the legislature approves Belinda's petition. Enslaved and free blacks in Massachusetts use rhetoric of revolution to argue for freedom in formal petitions and in poetry. Thank you for joining us on the tour of the main house. I hope that the tour has helped to highlight the parallel lives of the Royall family and the enslaved people who made their lavish lifestyle possible. I hope that you can join us one day here on site to learn more about the museum and the history of Northern slavery. Again, my name is Lee LaFleur. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Leela. And Kyera.
Now we are in the slave quarters,
hold on one
which are the
second. Let me
only
stop
freestanding slave quarters in the
video.
northern United States.
All right, there we go. Okay, so there's actually much more left for of the virtual tour, but I'm going to pause it there just because I want to make sure we have time for question and answers. But I'm going to just narrate just a little bit more about what the inside of the slave quarters looks like, and how we connect that to the broader story of freedom and emancipation. So where Lee ends in the tour is on the story of Belinda Sutton. And Belinda Sutton actually becomes quite an amazing figure for us at the Royall House and Slave Quarters, because she, in 1783, petitions the Massachusetts legislature for a pension. She receives a pension, an annual pension of 15 pounds and 12 shillings. However, she only receives 2 payments and spends the next portion of her life petitioning to get the money that was owed to her. The way that I like to talk about it is that at some point, Belinda knew that she was not going to get all of this money after the legislature only gives her 2 payments. But the way that we can understand a part of what she does is that she's petitioning not only because she needs that money, she's also petitioning in a way that other Black women have done throughout history, which is to leave a record behind of their life. And actually, the petitions allow us a lot of insight into Belinda's life. We know that she moves to Boston. We know that one of her daughters is literate because her daughter signed one of the petition. We know that she gets married, and that's where we know her last name is Sutton. And we've been doing a lot of new research, so it's hard for me to not want to talk about it, but we know a lot more actually. And I'm really excited to think about the ways in which the stories on the Royall House, at the Royall House and Slave Quarters, is going to expand and tell a broader story, a story that is very much so embedded in the Atlantic world, and really helping to understand how the plantation can tell not only a local story, but a national story and a global story of slavery and Black resistance. Outside of that, one of the other things that we use in doing the tour are a lot of artifacts. We uncovered 65,000 artifacts in an archaeological dig that was done between 1999 and 2001. And right now, I just had a conversation with Boston's archaeologists because I want to dig again, because there are some spots that were missed, some spots that are really important for trying to find artifacts about enslaved people actually. And so there's a lot of awesome potential for the site, and also the 3rd floor is not necessarily interpreted yet either. And so we have a lot of big plans on the horizon, but more importantly, those artifacts really do allow us to think about the ways in which enslaved people try to circumvent their enslavement and their surveillance. And so we have game pieces that are fashioned out of tile that was either discarded or stolen from the big house. And those artifacts were found directly in front of the slave quarters. And for people who will have a chance to come to the museum, what you'll see is that if you are standing in front of the slave quarters, you cannot see anything from the main house or the big house. So it does give us insight about not only the fact that enslaved people, obviously they know the land because they're working the land, but more importantly, they know where they can be seen. And so they're able to carve out moments of privacy for themselves. And I'll end on the fact that, we did this virtual tour right at the beginning of COVID. And so right now, as I'm watching it with you all, I'm like, oh, we have to update so much more. And a part of that is because, it's a house museum and the house is the house. However, the stories can change even if the house doesn't. And so I'm really excited to unveil a lot of new stories, but more importantly, to think about the items that we already have and to ask our guests when they come. One of the things I always say is, what do you see versus what don't you see? And then we lean into what we don't see, because in that space is where we often can really see the world that enslaved people are building, not only on the plantation, but in Medford and Boston and Waltham and Woburn and Antigua and Suriname and Bristol, Rhode Island, all places where the Royals, we know, end up for bits of time. So I will end on one note, Dennis asked me to present, as a lead up to Juneteenth. And one of the things that I will say, and one of the things that's really important to me that I stress when people come to the Royall House and slave quarters is that you can't really say that you care about Black people's freedom dreams in the 18th century if you do not care about Black people's freedom dreams today. And a big part of our work is thinking about how those legacies of slavery impact Black and Brown communities every single day. And that is where I'll end.
Kyera, thank you very much. Both you and Lee for a very informative tour of the Royall House. I must add that a few months back, Egypt, my daughter Jordan, Beverly, we had an opportunity to meet Julia Royall, a descendant of the Royall family, and we met her at Harvard Chapel, and we had a nice little ceremony there. And then we went over to the law school, where we looked at some of Julia Royall's family's documents, and including the will where Isaac Royall Jr., Isaac Royall bequeathed our great grandmother, descendant, Cuba to Penelope. So it was a very emotional and very interesting, and needless to say, very friendly gathering. And then we had dinner together with Julia, a very nice person who on occasion has joined us. I don't see her today, and we are in touch with her. So that's
she had another conflict meeting, but she was planning on joining us today. Okay. She was meeting, so she does send her hellos to everyone.
Okay, well, and again, it was very, very great to meet Julia, and we still have we've developed a very nice relationship with her, with the Royall family, with her. We have some questions in the chat. Can you read those off, Egypt? Have you seen them? I saw a couple here.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me okay, Dad?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we have a few good questions in the chat. Kyera, the Shirley Eustace House is wanting to know, do we know how many acres were in Antigua and how many enslaved at any given time?
That's a good question. So we're working with my close friend and also an amazing historian, Abed Alibi, who's doing a lot of research about Antigua for us. And so we can find that out, actually. We can estimate how many enslaved people were there. We don't have a concrete number at this time, but it is something that we'll be able to give everyone in a little bit.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. We have a couple more questions. Brooke is wanting to know, he referred to the ceiling lighting fixtures as scones that I would have called a chandelier. Can you explain the terms?
Yeah, so the sconce is just the historical term for it. So on the inventory, it's listed as a sconce. And yes, like today we would consider it to be a chandelier, but it's a bronze sconce. It's actually a very expensive item, one of the most expensive items on the inventory in the house, actually. But yeah, that's the historical term for it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Thank you for that. And Sarah is wanting to know, at what point did the house become a museum? And was it in a private ownership as a residence from the Revolution up until the time that it became a museum?
Yeah, so it's been a museum for quite some time, actually. So after the property is, after the plantation is confiscated, it stays in the government's control for a bit. And then the Tidd family, people might recognize that name, that last name Tidd. They were a prominent family in Boston. They purchased it as a summer home. And then it actually passed through a few more families before it fell into disrepair. And then the Daughters of the American Revolution actually acquired the property. And the first time that they open up for an exhibition showing is around 1896, but it officially becomes a museum at the turn of the 20th century once the Royall House Association is formed. What's really interesting about the Daughters of American Revolution and the acquiring of the property, the reason why the inside of the slave quarters no longer looks like what it would have looked like in the 18th century is because they made it the base of operation. And so what we know is that the slave quarters would have been divided into 3 smaller rooms, and enslaved people would have been doing a bunch of different labor in that room, in those workshops, essentially, cooking, ironing, dairy production, a few other things as well. It would have also been used as a storage facility for tools as well. And then enslaved people would have slept in the building. But when the Daughters of the American Revolution acquired the property, basically they gutted the inside of it and they turned it into the base of operation for the museum. And so for me, that space becomes really instructive about whose history has been valued and whose history has been devalued. And our ultimate goal is to change it back to what it would have looked like in the 18th century. But it's been a museum for quite some time. It didn't always have the current interpretation that we have now. If you would have gone, 30, 40 years ago, even 20, 25 years ago, you would have mostly had a conversation about the connections to the revolution and what we call the elegant royals. And you wouldn't have really learned about the history of slavery. And so a lot of that work was done before I even got there. And now we've been just kind of pushing the interpretation forward.
Wow.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
Well, I was just going to invite anyone with any last questions for Kyera before we close today's meeting. And also, too, I failed to mention earlier, if today is your first time joining with us, if you could put your name in the chat as well as your affiliate organization so we can thank you for joining us today. And I'm not seeing, oh, we do have a little bit more questions coming in from Jacqueline. Kyera, she's wanting to know, did the enslaved bring their foodways and customs?
Yeah, of course. I also see another question too about the current name. So I'll do the name first, and then I'll answer the one about foodways. So the Royall House and Slave Quarters, it wasn't always called the Royall House and Slave Quarters. That name change happened in 2005, and it was to privilege both structures on the plantation, so that anyone who came to the museum knew that they weren't going to just learn about the royals, but they were also going to learn about the history of slavery, and that we were valuing the slave quarters actually more in many ways than we value the big house. But what I will say is that the big house is also a slave quarters, as you saw Lee demonstrate that there are enslaved people who are sleeping in that space as well. And so a part of the name change was to really get people, out of the thinking that they were coming to just see a beautiful colonial Georgian mansion and, look at the items that the royals acquired and not engage with the history of slavery. And so that was a part of why the name was changed. In terms of foodways, that's a really, really great question, and one in which, I think that we know a few things. We know that the enslaved people that the royals are bringing over. Most people are coming with their own, they're all coming with their own skills and their knowledge, right? In order to run a plantation, in order to keep the timetable, thinking about, running a kitchen, enslaved women are extremely skilled laborers. They're not only, cooking for the royals, they're cooking for themselves. They're often, utilizing their own recipes refugees that are coming from their own homelands. And so I think I often like to push back against the idea of skilled versus unskilled labor, because I don't really know what unskilled labor is when it comes to the history of slavery and what enslaved people are doing on that plantation. So of course they're bringing in their own foodways. In terms of like what's actually growing on the plantation, which I think a part of that question is hinting at indirectly, there is not necessarily, it's not a plantation in which, the Royals are growing a ton of crops. Actually, the biggest source of food on that plantation that they have on the inventory is livestock. So think sheeps and cows and other animals, but we imagine that there would have been a garden, enslaved people would have grown their own food, and they also would have been able to utilize the land and most likely pick fruit from the orchards that were there as well.
Wow, thank you, Kyera. Any more questions? Yeah.
Any more? A lot of good comments about Kyera. Everybody really enjoyed your presentation today. A lot of great comments in there. I don't see any more questions as of yet, Dad.
Okay. Well, Kyera, thank you very much. This is very informative. As we all know, there are a number of wonderful historic sites in the New England and certainly in the Boston, Cambridge area.
I think he
You're
muted himself.
Okay.
Oh, there he goes.
You missed my eloquent speech there.
Yeah.
Now, as we all know, there are a number of wonderful historical sites in the Boston, Cambridge, and beyond. But primarily in our area, we have been, for better or worse, we have a number of historical sites. Clearly, the Royall House, just heard, the Longfellow House, who was presented. We also have the Shirley Eustace House, which is in Roxbury, and we look forward to hearing something from them later this year. So Shirley Eustace House, again, the home of Governor Shirley, if I'm not mistaken. But I did
sat on the governor's council, so there's all types of connections between all of the sites, which is really exciting.
It is. It really is. It really is. It's such a small community, which we've learned, over these last couple of years of having engaged with so many people on this journey. I did want to thank. Is it Kay Payne from England? We have someone from England who was joining us who must have it's in the afternoon, but she said, good afternoon. So it must be afternoon in England. So thank you very much for joining us. I did want to mention that on Sunday, Dr. Harris Gibson, a renowned cardiologist and thoracic surgeon who is amongst us today, and he will be joining us at the Longfellow House for the Juneteenth presentation. As you know, on that day, the Longfellow House will be featuring the film The Descendants, which was produced by Margaret Brown as a result of the Barack and Michelle Obama production company, President Barack Obama, and it's about Africatown. And Dr. Gibson was born in Africatown, so he is going to be there. He's going to introduce him. He can offer certainly some insight, some words about his time in Africatown. So we're looking forward to that. And that's on Sunday, June 18th at the Longfellow House. We also looking forward to presenting something on the Gullah Geechee culture, which hopefully I'll be working with Dr. Robert Bellinger, and as we pull together something of interest on the heritage of the Gullah Geechee culture. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Gullah Geechee culture, it's off the coast of South Carolina, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, a number of islands where slaves were able to, at that time, people who were enslaved, who escaped to and settled, and their culture was maintained. And very interesting. I've had a chance to visit a couple of the islands off the coast of Georgia. So we're looking forward to presenting, something later this year on the Gullah Geechee culture. And having said that, I was wondering if there are, again, any individuals here who are members or affiliates who have an interesting story or enslaved history. Please let us know, and we'd like to, welcome an opportunity to hear your story at some point. And having said that, we hope to see many of you this weekend. We want to thank Kyera and Lee, and I certainly want to thank all of you who put well wishes for happy birthday in the chat for me. So thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. And thank you. And we look forward. Now we will be away for June, the rest of June, July, and August, reconvening again on September 13th with Sarah Bleich, Vice Provost of Arts and Science and Director of the Special Project for Harvard University. So we're looking forward to hearing from Sarah at that point in time. And that's September 13th. You will be hearing some information on that. And one final point, we will be sending out something in the near future here, which will contain all of the past presentations that have been done and recorded, so that you can click back and see what you might have missed. So again, thank you all very much to all of you, Robin, everyone, Paula.
Dennis, before
Yes.
you sign off, I just wanted to say that on Sunday at 11 o'clock, I'll be giving a talk at the Community Church of Boston. On the title is Landmarks of Slavery and Freedom, Perspectives from a Public Historian at 11 o'clock. So if anyone has time, stop by.
Okay, and now where's that going to be again, Bob?
Community Church in Boston. I can send you the all the information to send.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get it out to everyone for you, Dr. Bellinger.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well, thank you. This again, as you can see, there are a number of interesting informational, historical presentations that are taking place, and we'd like to share them. That's what the Slave Legacy History Coalition is about. It's a platform where we can present stories of enslaved people. So we welcome you all to participate, and we certainly hope that all of you have a wonderful summer, and we look forward to seeing you, if not on Sunday, maybe certainly at a future event. And if not then, we will see you in September, okay? So have a wonderful summer. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your participation. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyera. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Okay.